welcome, folks. First of all, feel free to eat a lot of food and drink a lot of drinks, and don't be shy about going back and forth and getting more food as the evening goes. I want to thank you all for coming tonight to our event, Reporting on Science in an Era of Misinformation, our panel discussion for this evening. We're going to get started very quickly, but I want to start by thanking sponsors of our event, which include the UC Center for Public Engagement with Science, which we all call PEWS. Two of our panelists are from PEWS, and lots of the folks in the audience are from PEWS. Also, the Greater Cincinnati Pro Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, which we'll just call by its acronym, which is SPJ, and we're going to hear from Ginny McCabe, the president, in just a minute. But both these organizations are sponsors, co-sponsors, along with the UC Office of Research. And then also I want to give a shout out to SciLine, which is a free, nonpartisan, philanthropic funded service for journalists and scientists that is based in the American Association. Are we doing okay on this sound? Okay, American Association for the Advancement of Science. SciLine's mission is to enhance the amount and quality of scientific evidence in news stories, and one of our panelists for this evening, Sara Whitlock, is here on behalf of SciLine. So thank you to those sponsors. We're going to get started. We're going to hear from two speakers, very briefly, very important people that we just want to thank and have represented before we do our panel discussion. And I'd like to introduce the first of those two people is Dr. Rena Williams, who's the Associate Dean for the Social Sciences for the College of Arts and Sciences. She's going to say a few words here about PEWS and the College of Arts and Sciences, and then we'll hear from Ginny McCabe. So come right up, Dr. Williams.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to see you all. I'm going to stay in this vicinity because that seems to work best. It's wonderful to see all of you. It's a really good turnout, especially for a drizzly Thursday evening. It is my genuine pleasure and honor to be invited to say a few words here. I don't know if I'm worthy, but I'll try. I understand that Ginny McCabe will say a few words about SPJ, Society for Professional Journalists. We'll speak to it much more intelligently than I could, so I'm going to say a few words about PEWS. So Professor Angela Potocznik, who many of you know is the heart and the beating soul and the engine of PEWS, is traveling, couldn't be here tonight. So I thought, and she's very disappointed to miss it, so saying a few words. I don't know if I'm saying a few words in her place. Like, no one could really replace Angela, so I'm not even trying to do that. But she's done an amazing job with PEWS. So I became Associate Dean in January, and it quickly, so I'm going to keep playing the newbie card until the end of the year. I think I have a year to play the newbie card. But it very quickly became clear that PEWS is one of the jewels in the crown of the college. It's represents sort of everything that we're trying to do in the college and across the college, across divisions. I mean, whether it's sort of college vision of putting discovery into action, whether it's the humanities and raising the public profile of the humanities, whether it's sort of the vision for the social sciences being especially focused on social understanding and public impact, all of it is sort of completely epitomized by PEWS. It is thoroughly interdisciplinary in its approach and its leadership. 23 faculty affiliates across 8 colleges. I'm pretty sure that's a record. I'm going to check. External partnerships, in this case SPJ. So it's just all here. And then in turn, I think you can see all those same things in this panel and this evening's lineup, right? So we have scientists, applied scientists, practitioners, media, print media, television media, academics, we have everything here that we need to figure out, if not all the answers, certainly what the critical questions are when we're thinking about reporting on science in an era of misinformation. So I will wrap it up there because there are people far more interesting than me to hear from on this stage. My plan is to go back down, sit in the seat, and get enlightened for the next little while, and I invite you to do the same.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. We appreciate that so much. And Ginny McCabe is going to come up and talk to you a little bit about the Society of Professional Journalists and what they do for journalists in Cincinnati and beyond. So welcome to my good friend and colleague, Ginny.
Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Thank you for coming out. This is going to be a wonderful evening. We're really excited about it. As Jenny mentioned, my name is Jenny McCabe. I'm the president of the Greater Cincinnati SPJ. Just to tell you a little bit about our chapter, we are an award-winning group. We're considered a small chapter for SPJ, but we do a lot of great work. We have won awards year after year, not only for our programming and some of the great things we do, we've also won awards for campus relations, largely with UC, Miami University, and a few others in town. But I just wanted to say hello, really, welcome you, and say have a great night tonight. I also want to say special thanks to Jenny, the team at UC, PEWS, SciLine, and all of our partners tonight. So have a great evening. If you're not a member of SPJ, they do have memberships available for students and for pros, spj.org, and you can mark Cincinnati as your chapter. So have a great night, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much, Ginny. We're getting on to the main event here in one second, but I just wanted to tell you how we would like to handle your participation and involvement in tonight. So Ginny and Kate Nicole and Elena are all going to kind of be keeping their eyes out and looking for folks that might raise their hand and want to ask a question. And how we're going to do the questions, we'll have time at the end for Q&A, but we also want to be able to work your questions in as we go. So all three of these lovely ladies that are helping this evening will have little index cards, and we brought pens too, because no one in the world, I know this because I teach, and no students have pens anymore. They're like, oh, we don't have pens, we just have devices we can type on. But anyway, so I brought pens in case you don't have pens in your pocket or your pocket purse or whatever. So we got pens and note cards, and they'll just be looking around. If you just kind of raise your hand, they'll come to you. You can write a question on the card. They'll collect the cards, and they'll bring the cards to me as we're having the discussion so we can kind of work your questions in. We'll also have time at the end if you want to ask your own question, but we just don't want you to have to wait for that. So that's why we're doing the note cards that allow you, if you're just urgently wanting to ask a question, wave your hand. One of our helpers will come to you, bring a note card, collect that, and bring that up to us. And so do please feel welcome to participate. We want to keep things moving quickly because we want to be cognizant of your time, but we also want you to feel engaged in the process. So if you have those questions, please don't hesitate to fill out a note card, and our folks will help. They'll be looking for you. They're wonderful, helpful people. So, and with no further ado, I'm going to go sit over here. I need to move this microphone with me. And how we're going to, instead of me, hang on a second. Instead of me going and reading bios of all of our panelists today, I've asked each of them, we're going to have each of them introduce themselves briefly and then give you a sense of how their work overlaps with the context of this particular panel discussion that we're having today. So we'll just go down the line and get started that way. If Dr. Gaskins wouldn't mind starting for us and introducing herself, and then we'll go down the line.
Sounds good. Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Whitney Gaskins. I'm an Associate Dean in the College of Engineering and Applied Science. My background is in engineering, so I have my bachelor's and my PhD in biomedical engineering, and I have my master's degree in quantitative analysis. I am also a nonprofit founder here in the city of Cincinnati, and so the Gaskins Foundation is an organization here that helps expose kids to science, technology, engineering, and math. You'll hear a little bit more about what we do and why we do it through the panel tonight, but my intersection is that I have to communicate with children, parents, educators, students, both undergraduate and graduate, about what's actually happening in the world and the work that I do. Because I oversee some equity work too, increasingly I am always challenged about why we need to work on equity in engineering. I'm so looking forward to having this discussion tonight.
Hi, I'm Duane Pohlman. I'm Chief Investigative Reporter with Local 12. I am also a national correspondent with Spotlight on America. I've worked across the country, traveled the world. I've been in journalism a very, very long time as an investigative reporter. And my job intersects with science all the time, now more than ever. Just to give you an idea, and we'll talk some of these, the heaviest work I'm doing and have been doing for the past 5 years is radioactive contamination, cancer, and death around Cold War facilities. And that, I believe, qualifies as a really tough lift in any realm. And we've made great progress in understanding that. When I say we, that's in collaboration with nuclear physicists and scientists. Today I was on an interview on Zoom with an epidemiologist, and I could go on, but we'll just set the table there.
Hi, I'm Amy Townsend-Small. I'm a professor here at UC in the School of Environment and Sustainability, and I study environmental impacts of the oil and gas industry. It's a topic of great interest to the public, and it's a topic that some people would prefer you don't know much about. So I work with journalists in a few different ways. I try to publicize my work sometimes, like many different professors. But I've also helped to educate journalists about oil and gas issues through field training programs. One example is the Institute for Journalism and Natural Resources. And I've worked closely with programs you'll hear about tonight, like SciLine, in many different ways. And I've also done more than maybe you've heard about scientists doing before. I've collaborated with investigative journalists on research projects in the field, in oil and gas fields, so actually doing research together with them. And I also help investigative journalists investigate oil and gas sites that might be affecting people. And of course, one of the most exciting things is there's journalists in my academic department. So I work with Jenny and her students and help them learn about how to work with scientists.
Hi everyone, I'm Sara Whitlock. I work for SciLine, which is a small nonprofit organization that Ginny talked about a little bit. It's based at a larger nonprofit organization called the American Association for the Advancement of Science. If you're at all familiar with the scientific journal Science, that's the scientific society that publishes that journal. We're a separate group, but our primary focus is to help reporters, specifically local reporters, to connect with scientists when they're working on stories that involve science angles. And we always like to say that we think that almost any story could benefit from a little bit of science. If you have kind of a science angle or a question that could benefit from the scientific process, there's somebody out there who's studying it. So we work across the divide of science and journalism. We help scientists to communicate as best they can, help them get prepped for that, and then help journalists to cover science as best as they can.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Betsy. I'm the health and environment reporter for the Enquirer. I come from an economics background, so I am always aware, I guess, of how rigorous the scientific process has to be when it comes to randomized control trials, how long it takes for research to transpire. And I also have my deadlines as a reporter, and so I'm always thinking about how much information is too much information. I think science is a really beautiful but also really messy process, and I am always finding myself wanting to explain more of that, but I have my deadlines, and I have sometimes just, a very limited amount of space. So, yeah, this panel is very interesting to me because I feel like I'm surrounded by people who are facing similar constraints. And yeah, always wanting to reach a broad audience with my stories and hopefully reach people I haven't reached before. So I'm always thinking about trust and transparency and things like that.
And I want to give a special extra thanks to Betsy Kim because she stepped in at the last minute when one of our other panelists, Siri Carpenter from the Open Notebook, had plans to come to Cincinnati for this event, and her mother was hospitalized. So Betsy was so gracious when I reached out to her very, very recently and said, "Can you come and be a part of this panel?" So we all wish Siri the best for her mother's recovery, and she's a delightful person, but actually I think there's a part we'll talk about later where Sarah's going to tell you a little bit about the Open Notebook as one of the many resources that are available to science journalists or journalists who are covering science in any capacity. So we will do a little shout out for the Open Notebook. So, well, thank you all so much for coming here. I'm going to open us up with a big old can of worms question. The current climate of the world in America right now seems like the truth is under attack and science is under attack and journalism is under attack, and communicating science accurately or communicating the truth is a goal that scientists and journalists share. It's a shared mission between these two professions. So my question for you, which I know is a loaded one, is why is it so imperative right now that scientists and journalists find ways to work together to communicate reliable and accurate information about scientific topics, and what's at stake if we don't get it right? So anybody can feel free to jump in on that one. Big old can of worms.
So from journalism side of all of this, truth is the commonality, as you said. The essence of what we do should not change because of the environment we face. We're cognizant of the assault on truth, but that should not change what we do. So the only thing that changes in my world is a dedication to do it even more rigorously, because we don't want any mistake. That's what we work for. And when it comes to science, it's especially important that we go through it in a much more rigorous fashion. For instance, I don't often do this, but when it comes to scientific endeavor, I will reach out before I air a story or publish a story to go through the details of what I'm about to air with the scientist, not for editorial control, but to make sure that I'm not misstepping, because I'm not trained in science. And I could see something as being really on target, but miss the target because of a misinterpretation. In that regard, I tell scientists all the time that I am visiting. You are the person who is giving the new revelation. In that way, there's a deference. So that in that way, I only see myself working a few extra steps to make sure that it's exactly the way it should be. And I think the only thing that what I'm realizing is that there is an inherent partnership when we're both dedicated, both sides of this, to the truth. And I will say that science in and of itself is pretty black and white. There are no grays in it. I mean, you can debate with the theories and et cetera, but it comes down to right here and right now, what does this say? And we have to work extra hard to make sure we don't misstep. That's the only thing.
This is a less scientific answer, but it is political, so I'm just going to put that out there now. Lives are at stake when we don't tell the truth. And that affects people in various different ways. When we're talking about how science and technology impact the world, literal lives are at stake. And so I think the worst thing that we ever did was allow people to discredit media to the level that we have. We'll never get over the fake news hashtag on things that are actually the truth. And we allowed that to happen, and no one pushed back. And we didn't push back hard enough when we gave it airtime. Like, we downplayed how important the media actually is to the general public to learn. Because a lot of people don't have access to scientific journals, and believe it or not, science literacy is low. We are in a more illiterate, innumerate, and definitely science illiterate society than we've ever been in before. And so when we were allowing people to downplay how important it was for our media to tell the truth and tell stories by hashtagging the truth fake news, we did a disservice to the public. And now lives are even more at stake than ever before. And the COVID pandemic did us no favors. from a standpoint of that, when we needed to trust science more, we blamed science instead of leaning in as a culture to figure out how to solve the problem together, because we allowed previously for people to put hashtags on things that were the truth. So that, to me, is why we need scientists and journalists to work together, because we went way far down a path we should never have gone down in the first place.
Any other thoughts? Are we good? Sarah?
Just jump in to add.
Yeah,
that,
go right ahead.
You know, it's really important, I think, for scientists and journalists to be working together now, not only because of all the challenges we as a society face that are related to science, but also because of a lot of the challenges that we've seen newsrooms facing. You know, we've seen a lot of different changes to how newsrooms are funded. So I'll repeat a little bit of that. Can you hear me? Good? I will get up close. Oh, there we go. There we go. Perfect. So I think it's really important for us to have scientists and journalists work together closely, not just because of challenges that we're facing as a society that are related to science, but also because of challenges that newsrooms are facing as they've gone through changes in their funding structure, as things have changed with the way journalism is working. We see a lot of newsrooms shrinking, a lot of local newspapers maybe not even existing anymore, or being bought by large corporations and their staff shrinking subsequently. And that means it's more critical than ever for the reporters that remain, who may not have a science background, to be able to work closely with scientists and to be able to get good information from scientists.
Great, thank you all. I'm going to direct this next question to our two scientists on our panel, Dr. Amy Townsend-Small and Dr. Whitney Gaskins. So the questions I have we're doing one at a time, but what are some of the experiences that you have personally had with communicating science to news media outlets, and have those been good experiences or bad experiences or a mixture? So from your perspective as scientists, how's it been going?
I would say I've had mostly good experiences, especially as I mentioned, as I've developed relationships with journalists, and institutions like SciLine have been very helpful in that regard. But I have had some bad experiences, especially as you alluded to, Dr. Gaskins, the narrative has gotten lost. And I think it's sometimes hard for people to distinguish between vetted media organizations and blogs and social media, which is easier for, in my case, like the oil industry to manipulate. So that has happened to me a lot, and with negative consequences. So they can spin the narrative against me in my case. So it's really helpful if you have supportive colleagues in that case.
Dr. Gaskins, you want to address that?
I've had a mixed experience. I will say it's been mostly positive. And I actually really enjoy working with media to make sure we are telling a broader story, because I do know how important that telling these stories actually are. The mixed bag comes in where people are hunting for their side of the story, like that slant in the story to try to come up with what I think are false statements to try to prove themselves right. I've had those experiences instead of coming to it with an open mind to understand that you might not actually know what you need to know to tell the story that you think you're going to tell. So I know you want to prove this narrative, but there's no evidence to support that. And you have to be open to the fact that you could, in fact, be wrong. And I've had that experience where they just wanted to be right so badly that they just ignored all the evidence that proved that their story was indeed not correct.
I'm going to direct a question to Sara, and then I'm going to come to our journalist on the panel. So Sara, what are some of the complications that you see from your kind of bird's eye view at SciLine, where you're working with scientists and journalists? What do you see in the what do you hear from scientists and journalists in regard to the challenges that they have in trying to work together and trying to communicate science accurately?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll say for a bit of context that one of the things we do at SciLine is when reporters are writing a story and they need a scientist source, they will come to us and we will help them connect with someone who's available on their deadline. And so in the process of doing that, we see a lot of kind of the day-to-day cultural frustrations that journalists and scientists face when they're working together. So the process of science is very slow. It takes a long time. Oftentimes scientific projects last years, and oftentimes that is not the time scale that journalists are working on. Most of the time, their stories are, 2 hours from now, I need to have this interview done, or hopefully maybe even in a week, which is long in journalism, but very, very short in science. So a lot of times we see miscommunications around the scientist can't understand why the journalist needs to talk to them so quickly. The journalists might struggle a lot to find a scientist who's willing to talk to them very quickly. So that's one of the primary ones. And then kind of downstream from that, even because science is such a long process and it's an iterative process, it doesn't come up with these spicy new statements very often. We can see that it doesn't always fit very well into the news structure where it's, something happened this week and it's a big exciting event. So we can sometimes see some sensationalization of scientific results because they just operate in a really different way than the news ecosystem, which is not to say it can't be done well, but it's a little bit challenging.
To pick up on what Sara was just saying, I'm going to jump to the journalist because there's a good connection there to something I wanted to ask. Can you guys, Duane and Betsy, talk a little bit about, for the non-journalists in the audience, sort of like the difference between working on a short-term project, being a broadcast journalist that is going to be on the air at 6:30 or whatever, or the long-term projects that are more investigative in their nature, sort of the way that those processes work within your newsrooms, in regard to what Sara was saying about the timeline and how that can be difficult for scientists to work very, very quickly or get something out right away, or that kind of way of working, that journalists have to be able to do it in many different formats.
So the perfect example of immediacy is what just happened with the styrene leak. So in that case, and I was not involved in it, I do projects, so I'm looking at weeks, months, timelines, and et cetera. But in that case, what is demonstrated usually is, by and large, a lack of training about scientific matters. For instance, knowledge of toxic inventory, how a chemical behaves. And in newsrooms, particularly television newsrooms, although increasingly with newspapers, the spot news, the breaking news is kind of king. So everybody goes running and they tell what they can tell, and a lot of it is not correct. And that becomes really the issue. Like, we look for an explanation of what is the threat, why is this thing heating up, what's the potential for explosion, what are the effects of the exposure, those kinds of things. And if you haven't noticed in the media, traditional media as a whole, we've had a brain drain. That we've had people who've been in the media, for instance, television, who for decades who are no longer there. So you lost a lot of institutional understanding of the people who have learned this over time. It takes a while to catch up, and some of those weaknesses, your viewers, every now and then, I would imagine, you watch television news, and you see some of this play out. So that's kind of where we are right now, in that we have this transition to younger, forgive me, cheaper reporters as they try to keep the margins. And so that's a challenge that's going on that I'm not sure exactly how that is addressed. But from a scientific point of view, we need help more than ever in where we can have continuing education in this regard, because those who say on the journalism side that science is whatever, it used to be science is boring, or I don't want to talk about some peer-reviewed, et cetera, et cetera. It's the most important thing that we can do in understanding our world. Because in the end, yes, there are competing truths even in science, that different people, for a variety of reasons, sometimes, oddly enough, ego, that creates competing narratives on this. We get to truth by looking at exactly what is going on from the scientific understanding, and it plays out every day. So I guess long-winded, non-producer driven over me answer is that we need more of a connection with science, and I think that would benefit us all as we move forward.
Betsy, I'm going to go to you because you're what I consider to be a rarity in that you are a dedicated health and environmental reporter for a local news organization. You're a little bit of a dying breed in that respect. Newsrooms have shrunk and evolved, and there are reporters that specialize in these topics, but there are fewer and fewer of them, especially within local news. So I wonder what your take is on that, on how you see that line and how do you work in your newsroom in order, like, do you have to fight and advocate for stories about environment, health, and science stories? What's that experience like for you as a reporter, and also notably on the younger end of the spectrum, a newer reporter in this role? Not that I'm saying Duane's older. I'm just saying Duane took a stab at younger journalists. That's great.
I'm
So
good with
I'm
it.
giving you a chance to fight. No, but really, what's your experience been in that capacity?
There's so much to get into. For context, you guys, I started reporting for the Enquirer, which is my first newsroom job, in December, so it's less than a year on the job. My background is in data. Before I got to the Enquirer, I did a big data investigation into the national rape kit backlog, where I was harassing a lot of states to give me their crime data on rape kits and how long they haven't been tested or how long they've been sitting in a crime lab untested. And those kinds of big investigations, that one took me probably, I would say probably over 6 months. And I know there are a lot of differences between science and journalism. I would say the longer term the project, the more similar to science journalism gets, because you're making more ambitious claims. You're generally going after bigger people, oil and gas companies. You really want to be able to back up what you say. You want to double and triple check everything. And so when it comes to common ground, this is kind of going back to the question you asked before. Yeah, they're very similar. Actually, for my data investigation, I published a methodology article because I wanted anyone who wanted to replicate my investigation for further years to be able to do that. I published all of the data and said, here are all of the limitations of the data. That was very important to me, to be really transparent about the process and about where the data that I had collected, even though it was new and no one else had it, fell short. Breaking news is a different beast entirely. I was on a breaking story today that I did not finish, and it entailed calling about 25 people and getting maybe 2 calls back. And you're supposed to finish a story by the end of the day. And, I have other colleagues who write multiple stories in a day, which I would never be able to do. So my bread and butter, especially with my background in academia and data, is the long-term investigative stuff, because I love to become an expert in something. I love to be able to speak with authority on something that I've spent, maybe a year with. But sometimes I'm put on the breaking stories too, and that's when I think maybe reporters are the most annoying probably to people, because they're calling you because they really do need to speak to you right away. But, we're trying to do our jobs here. We're calling you because we want whatever the truth is. In breaking news, you don't have a lot of time, and so the truth is what someone told you in that instance. So I would say I do struggle with breaking news a lot because, again, my bread and butter is the investigative stuff. I hate incomplete information. It's not something I work well with. It really stresses me out. But as long as you can do something called attribution, which is this person, this police officer, the mayor, whoever it is, told me this at this time, that is the truth, right? Because that's all I knew as a journalist at that time. So as long as I can do that and attribute to the relevant authority, I think I've done my job in breaking.
I just as we talk through, I want to raise one really important point that is the old guy comment. Oftentimes, getting to the truth.
Can you tell he's the token person on the panel?
Yes,
that put the
welcome. I
needed
served
one
the
man.
demo
I
well.
said, Duane, will you be on this panel of awesome ladies? And he said, yes, I will.
I'm the
Yes, I
grumpy
will.
old guy. So here's what I have come to know. that I'm often battling not only the entity in the case of oil and gas, but our own government. So what I have come to understand is the association with government, with private sector, has crossed certain lines that has impacted our trust in government. My trust in government is it's never been great, but it has gotten much worse lately in my exploration of deep subjects. That, for instance, science can be manipulated by the government through the funding, particularly to universities that accept, they have to, and as a general rule to the scientists who serve within that institution. So the fact is that if you go after facts and the truth, you will most often have to go much deeper than just the outcome of government study. Because the government studies, you have to drill down now to figure out, for instance, if you're looking at contamination issues, what was used as background? How was the study advanced? And I think it's really important to understand that in the context, especially from journalism, but as a society, that maybe it's always been done this way. I don't know that. I only have like 8,000 years of this. But the fact is that you have at the basis a lack of trust that goes far beyond what we're doing here at the table. So question everything, because you will find out that it's not quite as pictured almost every time.
Don't question me, though. I'm telling you the truth all the time.
You may question everyone but Dr. Gaskins.
There it is.
Anybody want to add to that thought? I've got a question from the audience that I can go to, or? Okay. All right. Looks like an excellent question. Considering that most scientific articles are either behind the paywall or packed with academic language and jargon, how can systematic change bring about easier access to scientific content, and what can scientists do about that? Scientist question.
I mean, I would say that's one of the primary reasons that even though I've experienced negative impacts from talking to the media and talking to the public, that I continue to do it, because I feel really strongly that public outreach and talking to the media is a part of my job as an employee of a public institution and as a teacher, that's just part of the reason that I get paid by taxpayers. So, and I agree with you that, you know, the research that we do shouldn't be only for an audience of scientists.
It's actually anti why I got into research.
Right.
Which is interesting because it's all part of this game, I call it a game, of how do I get promoted in my job. And I am rewarded in my job by publications. But I went into the work that I'm in because I wanted to help people. I became an engineer because I wanted to help people. And if you have to pay to read an article full of jargon, I'm not doing what I actually sought out to do. So I am a part of PEWS very intentionally, so to teach people about the work that we do. The public engagement part was why I wanted to be a scientist and an engineer in the first place. And I've always been enamored with how we tell stories. And I've always been enamored with how powerful the media is. I am probably the perfect millennial child. I grew up reading Rainbow and Bill Nye the Science Guy and Mr. Wizard. So it should be no secret, like, why does Whitney do what she does and why does she use the media platforms that she does? Because I fell in love with science on TV. I fell in love with reading from TV. So how am I going to put the information that I now know behind some other thing that I didn't even know existed when I was growing up? I didn't even know what a doctorate was. Like, there was a doctor at my school, and I remember being like, why do we have to call her Dr. So-and-so? Like, what are they talking about? They're like, she is a doctor. And I was like, I didn't know what it was, right? So for these academics to publish and do these things, like it meant nothing to me. So I want to do work that means something to another little girl like me who is getting her information from the TV or magazines that used to be mailed to our home. I want people to be able to have that experience. I learned a lot of science from those media outlets.
Can I jump in real quick? Yeah, I want to highlight what Whitney just said about how she fell in love with science from TV and how important that public communication aspect is. And I also want to highlight that, not that I think that science should be behind paywalls, but there is a purpose for those very technical jargon papers. They serve a purpose to help communicate efficiently between different academics. And so that piece with the journalism is absolutely key in order for people to be able to really understand and appreciate science and learn about it. I think we need both the public communication, the work of journalists who help us translate, and the academic work.
I'm going to push back on one part of that. I don't disagree, right? Like, journal articles have a wonderful purpose, and before we have the sensational news and social media, people actually used to read journal articles around their dinner table, right? Like, it was just like a newspaper. People would be like, oh my gosh, did you hear about what this scientist did? I wonder how that went, right? Like, people did read them. My pushback is the funding that you were talking about. If it comes from the public, then the public should have access. So if it came from funding source of the National Science Foundation.
Most of it has public funding.
So why does the public need to pay to have access? You already paid for it. So I push back on that part just because I think that we have done our culture a disservice by not giving them access because it was public funding that paid for it.
That's a great story.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight, I fully agree that people should have access to to journal articles.
Sarah said she doesn't want anybody to have access. That's what I heard.
That's what I heard too. Joking, please.
I would also say I think universities need to do a better job at rewarding people that do public outreach. Right now, the main way that we are rewarded is through these publications of journal articles and by getting these federal grants. Yeah. And I think that doing public outreach, and maybe it's different in your college because of your work, but doing this kind of thing and talking to the media, it's not only not rewarded, it's often thankless or penalized, I would say. And that's something that absolutely needs to change.
I have two good questions sitting here, but I'm going to pick up on that idea, so I'm coming to these questions. But you opened up something I just want to talk about. What are some of, you were just getting into it, but what are some of the potential implications, advantages and disadvantages that scientists experience when they do talk to the media? Can you speak to that a little bit about either personally or that you know of other people? What's at stake? What can happen to scientists who do that on a regular basis?
I mean, I just said it, but
yeah.
I don't know.
I was wondering if you could share a little bit more personally. I know some personal. Yeah.
Oh, you have personal story. I have personal stories that have nothing to do with my science.
I'm doing a little digging here as a journalist. Yes, go right ahead.
But I get my personal stories are more about when I speak out. Then people look at who I am as a person, and then I get called a DEI hire, or there's attacks on my being, but not my science. Very rarely has anyone ever actually attacked my science. And I do some really interesting cutting edge tech things, right? Built a healthcare device that is helping with women and catch heart failure, right? So that they don't have to suffer from heart disease. That's something that I work on kind of as a side project, but no one ever attacks those things. People attack me as a person. And that is the ugly part of talking to the media, because I can fly under the radar, but then the minute my name is out there, then someone sees that I've said something, and then they look you up, and then they send you hate mail. Yeah.
Is it organized?
It depends. It depends on what element of my job that you're talking about, right? I do equity programming in our college, have done quite a few programs to get Black and brown students into engineering as well as women. And people find out about that, and there is organized, concerted effort to attack that, because why would we want women in science? They don't do men in science programs. I swear to you, that's kind of what I get. And I'm paraphrasing, but that is what they said. What? It just blows my mind. And then it happens, and I feel very unprotected. And so sometimes I have to like go back inside of myself and stay away because I need to make sure I'm handling that emotional toll well, because no one's ever been like, are you okay? No one's ever checked on me, right? I've even had students, we get students from all over. So you have to remember, our university culture mimics exactly what's happening in the current culture. So I have students that have written like hate messages in my teaching evaluations because of me, not because of my class, not the content, not that the learning wasn't good, but they didn't want to learn from a Black woman. That is hurtful and harmful. That's the stuff that I've experienced that were negative, never really about my science.
I mean, Jenny already knows all this, but I've been investigated by Congress multiple times. I've had my funding withdrawn by the government. I've been under political review by the federal government, so that is a little different, but.
Political review?
Yeah.
She studies big oil.
Yeah. I mean, that happened in the last presidential administration, so.
Which is why it was dangerous.
But again, I mean, people don't check on you. It would be nice if there were a more supportive culture around this issue.
Hey, Amy and Whitney, you guys doing okay?
Not really.
We're going to hang out afterwards.
Yeah, what they say.
And I know you journalists are hurting too, so we're all going to have group therapy at the end of this. All right, Dr. Gaskins mentioned, this is a question from the audience, mentioned that we did not push back and it has gone too far in regard to the fake news and all that. How can we get back to the pre-fake news era?
I will give you a perfect example that happened that I was like, wow, we need more of this. The presidential debate, when the moderators were like, that's not true, we fact-checked it, that's not true. We need people to say it immediately. Stop letting people just spout things without fact-checking it real time. Don't do it a year later. It's gonna take a lot of people. We have the knowledge though, right? Like as a populace, we have the knowledge. So when you see something that this is not true, and call it out in the moment, because what we did when it first happened is we laughed because we were like, no one's gonna believe that. Oh, look at that. And we thought it was funny, and it was entertaining. It was, but now it's scary because it's now turned in somebody's real lived perception in their reality. It's not funny anymore.
I think you're right. I think it's absolutely essential to use fact-checking, truth-telling, and with as much immediacy as possible.
Yes.
Oddly enough, the criticism was the moderators of the debate didn't do enough for the other candidate, which was interesting as well, because even the fact check itself was under attack. So the problem is that we have a false equivalency in the country for a variety of reasons, mostly out of fear, my belief, that we're not able to step in, will become the target of attack. That's where I think, on the journalism side, that should create even more of an incentive to step up. If you're there to protect yourself, you're probably not in the right position as a journalist. And, I can give a long litany of many, many times where I've been the target of many things, but that should not deter me. I'm shocked to hear the stories of scientists under direct attack. That shocks me.
We work at a public institution as well, though. So I think people think they have undue access to.
Yeah, I think it's crossed the lines of civility everywhere we look. However, that's the time when it should be really as clear as possible. I think we're, as a country and a world, going to come out of this and somehow rinse off this craziness. And I think that it needs more than ever clarity. Clarity. It's not because I'm taking a position of truth doesn't mean I oppose you. I just want the truth.
Yeah, and an assault on ignorance should never feel bad, right? I don't know everything. And so I should not feel attacked because I'm ignorant about a subject. I should actually want to learn, right? Like, we don't have that dedication to lifelong learning that we need the world to have.
Well, there's also, I think also from the temperature of politics, the goodwill of the average person has been taken advantage of to a certain extent. And that is where we need to just say, okay, look, here is where we go with the truth, and be very, very committed to that. That's and in a non-emotional way.
Mm-hmm. I would like to add like a wrinkle to this discussion, which has less to do with politics or 2016 and maybe more to do with like the infrastructure of the internet. I think it is a very, very confusing time to consume information. This is on my mind all the time because like we talk about it in meetings at the Enquirer, like how long are people actually staying on our articles? Like how long are they getting to the bottom where I'm explaining my process and trying to be transparent versus how many people are clicking on it? You know, that's not really my forte is, you know, getting those page views. But like page views means that people are seeing my story. You know, I don't want to sensationalize anything, but it does matter that they click. But yeah, I just kind of wonder what it means to, what it means for members of the public to figure out the truth when we have an internet that incentivizes the extremes. We have social media that incentivizes the endless doom scroll. I don't think it's a healthy way to consume information. I say that as a journalist, like everyone needs to log off. But, you know, I feel like I do see, again, a lot of commonalities between science literacy and media literacy, where like, if you read an article that's written by a journalist, you know, it is maybe as just like an average member of the public, not easy to know whether the journalist really did their job in terms of asking multiple people and trying to get more context. In the same way that they might see that something was published in a scientific journal somewhere, but they don't necessarily understand what it took to get there, who funded it. That's extremely important when it comes to like chemical contamination. Right, if it's, you know, a journal that is peer-reviewed. I'm sure there are a lot of people who don't know what peer-reviewed means. So I am a health reporter. I, you know, report on infectious disease all the time with the seasonal changes and, you know, cite the CDC guidelines. But like, I also come at it with a lot of empathy for just the average reader who didn't have the same level of maybe like schooling that I did. Like, it is a really confusing time to consume information. And I worry about the way we're all getting more segmented and how on the internet, at least, I see so few spaces for like just an intellectual debate. Like, no mudslinging, like don't be immature about it, but like science is debate, right? It's like building on a body of knowledge and evidence that is like always going to be imperfect. It's always going to be an approximation, right? But like as long as we build on the process, we will get closer and closer to figuring out the problem or figuring out the truth. So I would hope, yeah, I don't know. It's just like on my mind as a journalist. I have a lot. It's a very confusing time.
You got tons of nodding and affirmation up and down the line. And you also gave me a perfect pivot to a plant in the audience. So we have somebody here today. Amy Kosthoffer is the Assistant Director of Research and Data Services. And I said, Amy, I'm going to throw a question at you about reliability and credibility of sources. Can you be ready? And she said, yes. So it's increasingly, just as you heard Betsy say, it's increasingly harder for the public to know where they can get reliable information, where they can put their trust in the information they're looking at. Especially since the nature of this topic, scientific, health, environment-related topics. What advice do you have, in a nutshell, what would your producer give you, 1 minute and 30 seconds? I'm just kidding. But to answer, what advice do you have for the public to help them distinguish between credible and unreliable sources of scientific information in the media and online? Go, Amy! Oh, we should bring Amy a mic. Hang on.
Here's one.
Wow, yeah, there we go. We'll have Amy, yes. Thank you, Amy, in advance. Here we go.
Well, first of all, hello everyone, and thank you for giving a librarian a time to talk about information literacy. I just, so excited, and just a great panel to be able to present as well with, so thank you. And I really wish that every social media post would have at least 3 citations with them. I don't care about the citation style, just what are your sources when you're putting that stuff out there? It'd be really nice to know. Dr. James Mack, I don't know if he's here tonight, he's the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and he once said in a meeting, people trust information from people they trust, right? So how do you build up that trust? But I also think it's really good to have skepticism, right? So when you're looking at something and you're like reading something, you should be skeptical and you should ask some questions. And we have an acronym that we use called TRAP. So you ask yourself, is this information timely? Is it relevant? Because sometimes people are trying to off-label information to you. Is it authoritative? So again, where is it coming from? I do suggest .govs, even though there's been some comments about government information, but I still think that a lot of good sources are there, right? And then how accurate is it? And follow the links of whatever you're looking at. Follow the trail. So that's your skepticism. Pull that in and just, click on all the links and look where they're going, because they could be going to Amy's ice cream shop and information store, and you don't know anything about that, right? So I would follow that. And then what is the purpose of this source that you're reading? Are they trying to sell you something? Are they trying to persuade you of one particular viewpoint? So bring that skepticism. Of course, if you have questions, come to the library, and we'll help you get at all those, peer-reviewed information and qualitative sources, evaluated sources that people have curated to be good information sources. So we have lots of databases that have that kind of information in there. And I'm going to just take a pivot on my role as the helping people with their research and data services. One of the things that's happened in our country in the past year is we've just come through the year of open science. And so there's a really big push to get the product that taxpayers are paying for out to the public, industry, and other academics. So this is changing in our country. There's a big push for data sharing. And so as we become a more number-literate society, as Dr. Gaskins has said, hopefully we're able to look more at that kind of information. But it is changing and it's out there. And we have sources like PubMed. All the research that's coming from funding is being put in these resources. So that's another way of getting access to that information. It's not all behind a paywall. But you can also come to the University of Cincinnati libraries, and if something's behind a paywall, you can still look at it in our library. So
maybe a shout out for librarians and library science and the library. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Can I just throw in a quick plug? So I email scientists every day, and if you find sorry, I'm just really bad at this, you guys. But if you find a scientific journal article that you just are determined to read, try emailing the scientist who wrote it. They will often send it to you. So if you can't get it through the library, you can often get it from the scientist.
Great, Pete.
There are 2 things that I want to just add real quickly. Because of the craziness of that started back when prior to 16, the social media companies have really made a conscientious effort to suppress news. They don't want to be in that business. So a lot of the news that I'm under targets for social media, which is resulting in a lot of pictures of my dog. Really, honestly, that's where we are, because I put news stuff out there and it gets nothing because it's being suppressed. 2, the reliability of content for journalism. You only have to look to SPJ. It has the gold standard for how we should operate. It's called the Code of Ethics. And it really boils down to a very simple principle. Be truthful, be fair, be transparent, and the part, I can go on, but those are big ones of this, and you can see it online. But people forget the last one, which is the most important one: do least harm.
And in what we do as journalists, we are there not to harm. We're there to point out the truth and do it in a way where we're not, just doing a path of burning as we go. We're trying to do it in the right way. If you look at the motives behind what is happening, you can usually see that. Like, do your research. Ask, is this guy, what, or is he the real thing? Or is she somebody I can trust? That's one of the things that, if you're being the one who's going to harm people, word's going to get out pretty quickly. So do your research on the journalist as well, who is covering it.
We have several, thank you again, Amy, and thank you guys all. We're doing amazing. We're making great time. A couple of great questions from the audience. Where do y'all think, I said y'all, but they wrote, where do you all think the idea came from that it's not the media's job to fact check? Where do you think the idea came? Well, it was in reference earlier to the debate and how the moderators were pushing back. So the question is, where do you all think that came from, or that whole era came from, where people don't think it's the media's job to push back?
I don't think that's anything new. I think that, first of all, that we used to have the word objective in the Code of Ethics, and that's been removed because of all the science behind that. The idea that objectivity is impossible, but fairness isn't. And you can still aspire to remove as much of your own prejudice from the judgment. And so we're in a progress on understanding there. I don't think it's anything new. I don't think the media has ever been, as we know it, certainly TV news has never been like, oh, they're, by and large heroes. But, the point is that under attack, I mean, it's only just pronounced now for political gain or for some fear factor or racism or whatever it is on the ism. It's just, that's nothing new. It really does come down to, I know who I am, and I know what my mission is. It's pinned on truth. It's pinned on the idea that what I do will matter, that people, we say in a lot of ways, we're the voice for the voiceless. And I never like that term, because that says people who are disenfranchised don't have a voice. Yes, they do. They have a voice, and they've been talking. It's because we haven't been listening. Our job is to give a big megaphone to people who've been right from the beginning. That's what we do. And that is really, really critical, especially now. And I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop doing that, because if we stop now and just knuckle under to some of this hatred, we will end up losing everything. And by the way, on purpose, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, don't care about any of that debate. I am absolutely a fan of democracy, and journalism is inseparable from that.
I feel like Betsy kind of talked about this, though, right? No one knows what's credible, what's not credible. And so we do have news sources who have put out articles that were not fact-checked because you needed the clicks, you need the views. We're in that weird, we need to be relevant, we need to be first, we need to, even the thought of breaking news is strange to me sometimes, because sometimes you're like, do you need to actually break it right now? Maybe you need to investigate.
Is it really breaking?
Is it actually breaking?
Or is it broken?
Is it broken?
Right, some things, yeah, right? You need to get for safety, but some things you're like, that wasn't actually a breaking news story. You could have waited 10 minutes.
Well, it goes to what we talk about all the time. You have to be truthful in everything you do, and unfortunately, the commercial pressures sometimes create. But I think the click idea and all this social media. Hell, I go back to the ratings hunt when it was really hot and heavy. The same could be true. told true about that. That was the same stuff.
But we have to be honest. We did get more lax with the responsibility of reporting because we were in the fight to be relevant.
Yeah.
So when we talk about where did this notion come from? It came from the fact that we loosened our rigor because we put something else that was a little bit more important. That doesn't mean all reporters and all journalists are doing that. But we're in a reality where people are putting the number of views and clicks on an article as more important. So I have to be it makes the value system different.
I'm going to take it down to newspaper because we're in the fight of our lives.
Agreed.
We're losing 2 to 3 newspapers. What is it? A week now? Just across the country. Is it a month or a week? And TV, if you haven't noticed, has gotten to the point of where we're getting atrophy there. What you see in front of you on a media landscape is completely changing, and no one has the answer on what journalism is going to be moving forward. Sorry, set up for you. Take the table.
Do you want to weigh in, Betsy?
I'm making her.
Duane, quit being a man. Go ahead, Betsy. Any thoughts, Betsy?
Yeah. Yeah, I was joking before this panel that it's a weird time to be starting out in journalism. I really just got here, and everyone's like, the ship is sinking. Haven't you heard? And I'm like, I'm still here because I think it's important. I mean, I thought about doing a senior thesis in college, and I didn't end up doing it. I wrote a screenplay instead because I figured it'd be more fun. But when I was considering doing an economics thesis, I wanted to look at newspaper ownership because Jeff Bezos had just bought the Washington Post, and everyone was freaking out about it, and I didn't love the idea of a billionaire owning the Post. But I also wanted to track it over time and see if that was sort of an anomaly or not. And as I was writing kind of my pitch, if you will, for the thesis, I realized that the rich have kind of always owned newspapers because, I mean, a lot of the conversation around Jeff Bezos at the time was like, how is he going to affect, the Post's coverage? He owns so much of e-commerce now. And also so many small businesses now sell their products on Amazon, right? So his sphere of influence is huge. Newspapers kind of have always been owned by these magnates who've been, part of some sort of monopoly in some sort of industry at some time. So that did make me feel a little bit better because it made me want to innovate a little bit more in terms of how people think of newspaper ownership in terms of community, right? What does it mean for someone to feel a sense to identify with their local paper? So it is honestly demoralizing, I think, as a journalist in these times. Like, there are just so many layoffs that happen, and it's something that I talk about with my friends all the time who are in the industry. But perhaps it's not as sort of new of an issue as maybe like I had thought, like first entering it or first when I thought about writing this thesis.
So I got an interesting question from the audience, which picks up right where we are. In your opinion, would the better future be one where science and news have the resources to move faster, or one in which misinformation is more thoroughly regulated and everything moves slower? Right? Good. The audience is freaking brilliant. All right. What do you think?
This is an intellectual game of this or that. I don't know. Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, I would say in terms of science, from a scientific perspective, I don't think the issue is science isn't going fast or slow enough. I think it's not going at all. I don't think we have any money at all, essentially.
The resources aren't there
right.
to go fast or slow.
Right. So a lot of scientists are turning to like philanthropy or for-profits, as you mentioned, and using that to supplement their work, which is not ideal, in terms of how that may slant their work and their findings, or how they have to frame their findings.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that?
I guess I'll just pipe up and say, I think it would be great if newsrooms had enough resources to be able to go a little bit slower, not even necessarily a lot slower, but just folks like our lovely investigators here, if they were maybe a bigger proportion of the newsroom, if they didn't feel like they had to publish a ton of stories every single day, I think that would make it easier for this communication, this bridge between science and journalism to happen.
I don't publish or air. I'm probably one of about a dozen or so left in the country that's project driven, and I could not imagine doing the complexity of a scientific, endeavor. Yeah, you can get bits and pieces, but it's headline stuff. If you get into the real debate about where we are scientifically, where it needs to go, the stuff that really matters, that's almost impossible to do in a quick kind of blah. That doesn't, and usually when you're in that, the column inches, or in my case, the time on air is like a minute and a half. I mean, you can't really do that. And I supposedly have the luxury of 5-6 minutes, which, believe me, is not a lot of time when it comes to some of these complex issues. But the fact is look, the way I look at it is we have to reinvent how we do some of the things. I mean, everything is under scrutiny, as it feels like a cliche. So we have to reinvent, and in my opinion, it's going to be a partnership, a true collaboration to get to the truth. The scientists need to work on, as you said, communicating it, and journalists need to dedicate themselves to doing this kind of coverage. I mean, it's one of many things, policy and state government, among many things that we need to start committing ourselves to doing again. So I just think that it will inevitably lead toward a different landscape where subjects become more important than this idea of how many shootings were today, or stuff that really honestly has become so background noise oriented.
I love this question. Props to whoever asked it. Similarly to what Sara was saying before, I would love newsrooms to have more resources to not move more quickly or slowly, but to move more intentionally. Oh my goodness, the number of stupid meetings I've been in where I'm like, why? It feels like we've lost the plot here. I mean, a big sort of disadvantage of newsroom shrinking is that it's literally fewer people out in the communities, which is where journalists should be. So scientists have their own kind of like work and processes, and where journalists can offer more sort of like manpower is that we have the connections in the communities, like the people who are being affected by these issues that scientists are researching, investigating. I will give an example of a collaboration that I think was really powerful, like speaking to the sort of collaborations between scientists and journalists. I love that idea. There was a really incredible project that came out of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, where a reporter, Rachel DeSalle, and an academic whose name was also Rachel, whose last name I'm forgetting, teamed up on a project to determine the state of like Ohio's rape kit backlog, around 2018 or so. They got a bunch of volunteers to sign up and bother the law enforcement agencies in their sort of jurisdiction. That is not something that they would have been able to accomplish without community involvement. That is my vision of like the best of journalism, because you're sourcing people locally. You have the sort of scientific expertise from an academic and a journalist who has these community connections. So it's really everyone working together and accomplishing something that like one journalist would never be able to do on their own. So yeah, more time to move more intentionally and more resources as well.
I just want us to slow down as a society in general. Not quite sure why we're moving so fast, and the benefit of always having to do everything so rapidly and know everything the minute it's going on. I just think we all need to slow down for our own mental health and for our own being. So let's just slow it down a minute, get misinformation out, and hang on to the truth and make sure we're okay.
It's awesome. I'm going to do a little summing up. Number 1, support your local newsroom. Number
Yes.
2, go to your local library. 3, support scientific endeavors. 4, slow down and don't have to be in a rush all the time. So just summing up where we're at. I do have a couple questions that just came in. I'm going to look at those. Dr. Gaskins, I had a question I wanted to ask you. A lot of your work, a lot of your professional work has been focused on expanding the tent of STEM careers to include more youth of color and increasing visibility and representation in STEM fields. Can you talk about how you see a connection between that and that work that you're doing and what we're talking about here, the broader discussion of effectively and accurately communicating science to a broader audience that feels more inclusive on the messaging?
This is a great question because as you're talking about community, when we talk about science and if it's overly too much jargon, it's overly scientific, communities don't see themselves being a part of that field. And so when we talk about like, why is representation so low? It's not just one answer. It is a complex problem. We would call it a wicked problem because there's so many unintended consequences that happen from putting in different solutions. But one of those things that we know that can really, really help support is being able to communicate something in a community that in a way that they communicate. There is a friend of mine who has a company called STEM Media, and his company blew up not because of his science, and he's a fantastic engineer, but he does spoken word. And so he just did a spoken word piece about one of his research projects. And next thing you know, people are into the science. Now he's on, I think he's on an affiliate of PBS teaching science, which is really, really cool, right? I fell in love with Bill Nye, so it's awesome to see somebody do that. But like, you need to be able to relate to it. And if we really want more, and we want people to actually be able to be whatever that talent or skill that they may have, we want that to actually blossom. That means we have to communicate in a way that people can understand. Not everybody has their PhD, so why are we talking to them like they do? Talk to them about how it relates to them. Where does it show up for you in your everyday life? Most of the things that people are working on really do. Very few things are disconnected or abstract thought. They really do have a connection to your world, and we don't talk about it in that way, which is why we're losing people, which is why I'm so honed in on making sure that we can make science accessible. I have an art gallery opening, like they're putting it up right now, tomorrow, and it's about how parents in Black churches see STEM in their everyday life. They took pictures of where STEM shows up every day. We use those pictures, and then we made curriculum. And then we did the curriculum in their church. And so then they were able to talk about the connections of something that they see every day to the science, to their kids in a safe space in a way that they felt was safe for their community. We need more of that.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Come see it. It's at the Cincinnati Art Academy downtown.
Also, a good story for journalists.
I hadn't noticed.
Okay, here's a great question from the audience. Look at them exchanging cards. Look at Duane networking up here with Dr. Gaskins. All right, so this is a quote from what we said earlier. People trust info from people they trust. Scientists in the scientific process have sometimes caused the public's mistrust.
Yes.
With our society's low scientific literacy in mind, what is the responsibility of scientists and journalists in re-educating the public on how the scientific process works and why we should trust scientists? Have at it.
So we're asking, what do we need to do better?
What do we need to do? What is the responsibility of scientists and journalists in re-educating the public on how this scientific process works and why we should trust, they say scientists, but probably science and scientists?
Who was it that made the observation before we started that Christian Science Monitor you made the observation that in the articles, there's a really kind of interesting part where they, in a short way, say this is why we're doing the story.
The purpose of
the purpose.
of the
Why
story.
are we
wasting your time, supposedly, with what otherwise are you going to invest? I think that's interesting. The same is true on science, and even, forgive me, when you do some of the science, I work really hard on the writing of pieces and the storytelling, and it's not easy to tell a science story. Imminently, what I do is I find the impact, I do the personalization, someone affected. But even then, when you're talking about, let's just do the radioactive, I always say this, I'm talking about neptunium, americium, plutonium, and I'm looking at debates over the impact, et cetera, et cetera. We spend a lot of time on the journalism side on the storytelling, and we should. And there are a lot of journalists who don't do that very well. But I often go to the scientists to give me what the Christian Science Monitor does. Why did you do this? And if they can explain the process, you can include some of that so that it's not just like, blah, we found this out. I was curious, is usually where it started. I was curious about this, and this is why I did it. And my God, I found this was a surprise. I didn't expect that. Happens all the time. So if you can include the process, I find that it actually humanizes the scientists, certainly in the endeavor.
There was something in that question that I just keep thinking about, and it was we have caused the public's distrust. And all I think about, I feel like I'm always way too political, but you guys, that's who I am. The article that, I can't even remember the scientist's name, that published that vaccines cause autism in children, and people believe it to this day, even though the study has been replicated hundreds of times that there is no link at all. We definitely have caused some mistrust. And even the scientists themselves said I made it up, but people still believe it, even after the scientist said that
It was
retracted, done press, that like I was under pressure, I had to publish it, I was in the publisher perish model, like it wasn't real. And so part of me is thinking about like what can we do, because things like that do actually happen. But I feel like it goes back to we have to have a model of education that presents critical thinking. It is a very hard thing to say like, oh, it's the scientist's fault or the journalist's fault, when we don't have a level of critical thinking as part of our culture to say like, is that true? And then I think, Amy, you said it, like a minimum of 3 sources. Well, let me find another scientist or a journal article that can corroborate this, right? Like somebody else has had to find these science. And if you can't find anything, that should be clue one, like, I don't know, right? Like, and then start doing some digging, but you have to have like that critical thought to realize that you need to do some of those. We don't have that training.
So a lot of it feels like what was when I was young, really long time ago. When I was young, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I would get the information. This is before we could really readily get it on the internet. We would go down and get all this information, and I would misinterpret the information as a young reporter. I had mentors that would say, you're an idiot, and that was great, because I was. I didn't have the thing, and they would guide me. What is missing now is that you have in the landscape this information coming at you like a fire hose, and everybody has become an expert. That's what we're facing, and there's no rigor to it. That's kind of the essence of why this is such an important subject. What our job should be, I think, and I don't know how you folks feel, but our job should be as journalists who are trying to do the right thing is to hold up the experts and the heroes, and to reflect and project what is important, and be unabashed about that, because the world, to a certain extent, because of all of this unfettered information without the rigor and background, is jumping to these crazy conclusions. They really are looking for experts. They are looking for people who know what they're talking about. And if we can do that, and we are unabashed about that, both from the scientific point of view and the journalism point of view, it provides great hope. And I will tell you, I cover some of these stories that everybody internally in TV say, no one's gonna watch that, and it's blah, 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 and I'm like, be quiet. And they watch because they want to learn. Learning still is like a drug. It pops the mind, and that's what people want. They're not bad people. They just oftentimes go down the rabbit hole of these algorithms that lead them to just reflect oftentimes bad avenues. Am I right?
Right.
Thank you. That's all I want.
I would say in response to the question, it's not hard to add a little bit more science into everyday news stories. And I think about this all the time in response to climate and weather. Like today, there's a very large hurricane hitting probably right now, right this minute. And I think about that, if only reporters would start just getting a little more comfortable with talking about fossil fuels when they talk about climate change or extreme weather. That would make me not happy, I guess, but it would make a big difference. And Duane, I don't want to trigger you, but when we talk about...
Why do you say that?
I'm going to mention the styrene leak. Because I know it's an upsetting issue, but we just had another train incident here in Ohio, just in our region, in the last couple days. And this is another thing that's going to be happening more and more in our state as the oil and gas industry transitions from gasoline and providing natural gas for fuel to making plastics as we transition to renewables. And I didn't hear a reporter mention that. Not that maybe they did, but that scared me because these incidents are going to become bigger problems as more and more plastics manufacturing takes hold in our region. And I think that people would be interested to know about it. So don't be afraid to ask scientists for a little bit of context when you're reporting on even breaking news. Just one sentence would be great.
I live in that area, which also really bothered me about how it was covered, because people don't know what styrene is, and no one once broke it down.
No one said it was plastics. Yeah.
And I was like, you guys, and how the leak happened. Oh, there's so much.
it's
Sorry,
fine.
I'm triggered by it too.
I was a viewer.
Oh, you were a viewer.
And I also read because I wasn't called into it, and my wife had to calm me down from the coverage because it was hard to watch.
It was very hard to experience, and I agree with you. It would have
Well,
been...
I'm not trying to cut you off, but I will say they did a good job of covering the evacuation orders when people were going to be able to go home, which I think that's exactly what they wanted to hear.
But they could have also told them the long-term impacts too, right? We know what those are. Styrene isn't new. So we know that UV rays actually break down the chemical. It would have been nice to tell them that. So as it sits in the sun, it's breaking it down, and it might turn it into some hydrocarbons. You don't need to know what those are, but they're things that you live with around you all the time. Telling that could also ease fear, because now there's people I'm selling my house and I'm never coming back. And you're like,
yeah.
Okay.
So
The threat was on a massive release. There are known issues associated, and a lot of that is readily available as well through toxic inventory and et cetera.
they didn't know that, and they didn't say
It's
that.
also the convergence of science that sometimes it's really tough there are several things I know about journalists. Journalists many times don't excel at math or at a scientific background. You have to work at that.
But you could also just call a scientist to ask them to break it down for you.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
I will be interviewing you tomorrow, Amy, if it works for your schedule, because I I did not know that the oil and gas industry was moving in that direction. I think that's incredibly important. My mind was just blown.
Look at us making friends up here.
I didn't know that UV rays could break down styrene either. Anyways, this has been great for networking. I will say, it's interesting what Dr. Whitney was saying before about like, trying to search for another news article on the topic. Like, obviously, I don't think it's foolproof because, like, sometimes issues aren't covered. And so then, sometimes someone is the first one to do an investigation on a topic. But it's not that different from getting a second opinion from your doctor. Say your doctor recommends a surgery or some other, like, invasive procedure. You kind of want to go to someone else to ask, like, is this a good idea for my body, my health? I think it occurs to journalists to do that when you're looking for more context. It's good to know what other sort of like local outlets are doing. I mean, that's the sort of like competitive aspect of journalism. I think it occurs to scientists to do that because they are doing literature reviews before they write papers, right? For the average person, it might not be the first instinct. And I think it's difficult because like the way the internet is designed is for you to click on, get mad, and then click off, or like click on the next thing that's gonna make you mad, and then puppies, and then you don't really get to the truth of the matter, right? Like you're not incentivized to do like a literature review by yourself. But like, again, I think an informed electorate, an educated populace, like I really love the idea of fielding questions about my process. It's not perfect. And so I would always welcome that just as a journalist from people. And kind of more in the lack of like spaces, I think, on and off the internet where that can happen.
Excellent. Okay, are you ready? We got to take it home. We got to finish off. So I'm going to give you a question, yep. See, look, we tired them out. I know we're close on time, but we're going to wrap up here. Thank you for all your questions, but I want to ask the panel to kind of give us some parting thoughts. I'll frame it. If you want to answer this direct question, you can, or if you want to just answer whatever question you have in your mind right now. But we do have students in the audience, and I wonder if we can speak to what advice this panel has for aspiring scientists and aspiring journalists who are going to have to be navigating this world. Or you can answer a question in your own head, but we want to kind of, what are your final thoughts on your takeaways of what we need to do? Or if you want to address that, how can you inspire students' story? Take either of those. Have at it. Jump in. Duane, you go first.
How do you
ladies and gentlemen, ladies second.
I think just from an inspiration to everyone, students and everyone, is that while we have unique challenges, and it's very clear that the way that everything has been working is being reinvented, that what you have still is a core of dedicated people in science and in journalism who care very deeply about the endeavor of truth. Mm-hmm. And what I have found is, while a lot of the coverage, particularly cable coverage, that's basically a business model of appealing to sometimes extremist views, while that has created some of the backdrop of this political nightmare that we've been facing, we do have in front of us opportunity to reinvent in a way that gets us, frankly, closer to the truth than we could otherwise go. The thing that I love about this is that we're talking together, that we are recognizing. I mean, you can't solve something if you don't recognize the problem. So without sounding like I'm sucking up, I am in a little way, but the fact is that I'm eternally appreciative for these opportunities to have the discussion, because out of this, we get hope, and hope's really powerful. Mm-hmm. And we will get there if we dedicate ourselves to the idea that people really are trying to do that. So where you sit, I would say to you, become part of a solution. See what's in front of you and do what you can on whatever you bring to the table, because God knows we need everybody who wants to solve what we're facing.
I would say for the students in the audience, develop a habit of non-cable news, non-social media news. You don't have to pay for it. Talk to your librarian about how to access it without going through the paywall. You can do it through UC or through your local library. You can access NPR or PBS, which are excellent sources. But don't rely on social media or cable news, because they have a reason for you to consume what they want you to see. And when I ask my undergraduates how they get their news, they usually say social media, and that makes me worried. So that's my take-home message.
Other parting thoughts? I really just want to echo what several other of our panelists have already said. When it comes to journalism students, including information about the process of science is always going to increase trust in the scientists and the things that they're learning. And also, echoing a little bit of what Duane said, if you feel, and Whitney also, if you feel afraid of the science as a journalist or as a journalism student, please do reach out to a scientist. They're usually very happy to help, and you do not have to understand the math to do really excellent science coverage. So really great points from everyone here.
Sarah and Elena are coming to my class tomorrow, just FYI.
And if you have a problem finding a scientist, come to SciLine and we'll get you connected.
Yep.
I would say for the students, lean into your own curiosity. I really loved what Duane said before about all the scientists in their professions, like having a reason for ending up in the work that they do. I think it's beautiful, like the example that Dr. Whitney gave about Bill Nye. And I would also say delete your Instagram. Log off, like you'll be happier, trust me.
Well, Betsy took my thunder, because I was going to say the thing that really is going to support your entire life, not even just academics, but be curious and stay curious. Ask a ton of questions. Learn to dig deep. It will serve you well, because life happens. And sometimes you're going to have to figure out how to just get through things that aren't about a news story or your research project. It could be about your own personal health or raising children. Stay curious. Always have a curious mind. It will serve you very well as you're navigating life.
Okay, now I said it was going to end, but here's what we're going to do. If you're ready to go, you should go. But I also promised questions. We got a lot of questions in. So if my panelists would be willing to stick around a little bit, and anybody who wants to stick around, but if you're like, I've had it, I'm done, also I'm hungry and I want some more food, then do that. But if you were burning to ask a question, I want you to have a chance to ask that question. So we'll hand a microphone. We'll pass the microphone along. Oh, we're getting our picture taken. Yes, so we'll hang around a second, but in the meantime, thank you all for coming. I'm going to do a formal goodbye, but if you want to hang out and talk to the panelists for a few minutes, please do. And thank you to the panelists, thank you to my plant, thank you for all the students out here, thanks to PEWS, thanks to the Office of Research, thanks to SPJ. Wonderful session. Thank you all so much for coming. Please take food. Please take food on the way out, and in your pockets, your purse, whatever. And then if you want to come talk to some of the panelists, please come up. We don't want you to feel like you didn't get a chance to ask questions, but y'all sure sent some good questions up. Thank you, everybody, for coming.